My husband told me never to open the shed behind our house. One night I did, and my whole marriage collapsed. I wish I could tell you it was dramatic and loud, but it was not. It was soft. It was careful. It was the kind of ending that comes like evening, slow and sure, while you are still hopping for sunlight. Before I tell you what I found, I want to look you in the eye and say thank you for being here with me. I know you could be anywhere else, but you chose to sit with me for a little while. Smash that like button right now. Subscribe to this channel and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. It sounds small, but it helps me feel less alone as I speak. It lets me imagine your faces, kind and patient, across the table from me. I promise to keep my voice steady. I am not here to shame him. I loved my husband for years, and for most of those years I believed we were safe. We had our morning coffee in the kitchen, our little garden, and the gentle rhythm of two people who knew each other's footsteps in the hall. The shed was just a shadow at the edge of the yard, a plain door with a silver lock and one rule: do not open. Maybe you know that kind of rule. Maybe you have a closed door in your life that you walk past every day and try not to touch. I did that for a long time. I told myself that trust means letting some things be. I told myself that love can live with small mysteries. But one night the house was too quiet, and the wind pressed the trees against the roof. Rain whispered on the windows. I was holding a key I was not meant to hold, and I turned it. What waited on the other side was not a monster, but it was a truth that changed everything. I will tell you what I saw in that shed, what I felt in my chest, and how the floor of my life seemed to shift under my feet. I will not yell. I will not speak in anger. I may pause. I may breathe. But I will be honest and I will be gentle, because that is the only way I know how to honor what was real in our love. If you are tired tonight, if you are in a quiet place, come with me. Sit close. We will go one step at a time. We will walk through the small moments that led to the lock, the key, and the door, and we will come out the other side together. We met on a soft, gray morning at the town library. I was straightening a row of books that never seemed to stay in order. He was standing in the aisle, looking at a shelf of old cookbooks like they held a secret. He looked up, smiled, and asked if I knew a good recipe for cornbread. I laughed a little and said, "The one on page 52. He said, "Do you make it?" I told him I did on rainy days. He nodded, and I noticed the way he listened like each word mattered. We talked for a few minutes about food, and about weather, and about nothing big at all. He told me his name was Evan. He worked with his hands, he said, building kitchen cabinets and fixing whatever needed fixing. I told him I worked the front desk and the shelves and loved the quiet. He came back the next week with a small paper bag. Inside was a warm slice of cornbread wrapped in a napkin. "Your recipe, I think," he said, with a smile that reached his eyes. I took a bite and felt at home. Our first date was coffee at a small place by the river. We sat at a corner table and watched the water move. We spoke softly, not because we were shy, but because it felt right. He told me about his dad, who had taught him how to measure twice and cut once. I told him about my mom, who taught me to keep a kettle on and a door open for neighbors. I told him about my sister, Maya, who could talk me through any storm over the phone. He listened, and when I paused, he did not rush to fill the silence. He let the quiet be a place to breathe. We fell in love in simple ways. He brought me a small jar of nails once because he said I liked the smell of clean wood and metal. I laughed, but I put the jar on my windowsill anyway. I brought him a book of short stories, and he read them one chapter each night. Our weekends were walks through the farmer's market and slow drives on old roads. He held my hand, but not tight. When he laughed, it was low and warm. When he worried, he held his breath without knowing it. We got married on a mild day with a little wind. My dress was plain and soft. His suit was a little too big in the shoulders because he had borrowed it from a friend. We promised to be kind, to listen, to share the small things. We moved into a small house at the edge of town. It had a front porch with 2 steps and a garden that needed love. In the back, there was a simple shed, cedar boards gone gray with time. It stood a little apart, quiet and sturdy. We walked the yard together that first week. He touched the side of the shed and said, "I'll use this as my workshop." He smiled at me gentle, but his eyes were serious. Please don't go in there, all right? It's going to be messy, tools everywhere. I don't want you to get hurt." I looked at him and nodded. "All right," I said. "I trust you." I meant it. I had a small desk in the guest room where I kept my journal, and he never opened it. Boundaries felt like respect. He put a simple lock on the shed door. It was silver and shined in the sun. He said it was to keep neighborhood kids safe and to keep his tools from walking off. I accepted that, and I liked that he thought ahead. We settled into our routines without thinking. I woke first. I made coffee, 2 mugs, and buttered toast. I packed a small lunch for myself, and he grabbed a thermos for the day. He left for job sites with a pencil tucked behind his ear. I went to the library and helped people find books about gardens and history and love. In the evenings, we met back in the kitchen like the day had been counting down to that moment. We moved around each other easily, passing plates and sharing little stories. Sometimes I stood at the back door and watched him cross the yard at dusk. He would unlock the shed, go inside, and the light would glow soft behind the boards. I could hear a faint hum of a radio and the soft tap of wood against wood. He came back in with sawdust on his sleeves and a calm look on his face. The house felt like a gentle promise. We kept a small bowl of fruit on the table. We had a list on the fridge of things we wanted to do: paint the bedroom, plant tomatoes, take a weekend trip to the lake. We spoke about a baby in whispers at first, like it was a fragile bird. He once ran his hand over a small, old cradle we found at a yard sale. "I could refinish this," he said. "Make it smooth, make it safe." He looked at me, and there was a softness there that made my eyes warm. We put the cradle in the corner of the guest room and called it Hope. When I learned I was pregnant, it was early morning. I stood in the bathroom and stared at the little test like it had a heartbeat of its own. I came out and put his coffee in front of him, and my hands were shaking. "Evan," I said, "I think it's happening." He stood up so fast his chair made a soft scrape on the floor. He did not say much. He put his hands on my cheeks and kissed my forehead. We held each other in the quiet, and the house felt like it was listening. Those weeks were a mix of fragile joy and careful steps. We made a doctor's appointment. We didn't tell many people. We walked slower. He started coming home a little earlier, and he stood by the guest room doorway at night like a guard. And then it changed. I woke one night with a pain low in my belly that made me curl into myself. The hospital was cold and smelled clean. The doctor's face was kind, but the words were heavy. I remember holding onto Evan's hand. He didn't squeeze hard, he just held on. "I'm here," he said in a quiet voice that sounded like it was trying not to break. I nodded, but in my chest, something went still. We went home to a house that felt too quiet. There were no baby things to put away because we had not bought many. Still, the cradle in the corner looked like a question mark. I closed the door to that room and leaned my forehead against it. Grief came in waves that did not warn me. Some mornings, I would make coffee and then forget to drink it. Some nights, I would stand at the sink and let the water run over my hands until it went cold. Evan began to spend more time in the backyard, near the shed. He told me he needed to work with his hands. "It helps me think," he said. I nodded because I understood needing something to hold. He would come inside late, touch my shoulder, and sit with me for a few minutes before bed. We spoke softly about trying again, about rest, about taking time. We did not make promises. We did not set a date. We just tried to be gentle. My sister, Maya, came by with a casserole and careful eyes. She sat with me on the porch and let me lean on her shoulder. "Call me in the night if you need me," she said, "even if you only want to hear someone breathe." Evan's mom, Lydia, visited with a bag of groceries and a stack of folded towels. She had a way of keeping busy in grief, like if her hands moved, the pain could not catch up. She touched my cheek and said, "Time is kind even if it moves slow." I wanted to believe her. Our friends were tender. They brought flowers and soup and board games that did not ask much of the mind. Sometimes they talked about movies or weather on purpose to give our hearts a place to rest. They never stayed too long, which I appreciated. In those weeks, the shed became his quiet place. He fixed small things for neighbors and sanded smooth every uneven edge. The door stayed closed. I did not ask to come in, and he did not invite me. It felt like a part of him that needed to be alone. I could see the glow of the little bulb through the cracks in the boards at night. I knew the sound of each tool. The drill was a quick hum. The saw was a low, steady song. The hammer was a soft heartbeat. Sometimes he would come in with a piece of wood, shaped like a spoon or a little bird. He would rub his thumb along it and say, "I like to make quiet things." I would take the spoon and run my fingers over the smooth curve. It felt like prayer. We tried to attend a support group at the community center. We sat in a circle with strangers who spoke their pain like they were learning a new language. Evan was kind but spare with his words. Afterward, he squeezed my hand in the parking lot and said, "I can build things. I don't know how to build this." I told him, "We don't have to build it. We can just be in it." He nodded, but I could see the way his jaw tightened when he was holding back tears. That night, he went to the shed after dinner. I washed the dishes slowly and listened to the night. Work went on, as it does. I returned to the library and smiled at familiar faces. I shelved books about loss and did not look at their covers for long. He went to job sites and came home with dirt on his boots and a kiss for my hair. We kept talking, even if the words were small. "How was your day?" "Okay." "Did you eat?" "Yes." We found comfort in the asking, even when the answers were light. The seasons turned. The garden grew. He built a small fence around the tomatoes to keep rabbits away. I planted herbs in pots and learned when the mint wanted more water. On Sundays, we sometimes drove out to the lake and sat in the car, windows cracked, listening to the wind. We didn't always get out. Sometimes sitting was enough. We would share an apple and point at the same patch of sky. Through it all, the shed stood where it always had, plain and quiet. The lock caught the light in the afternoon. I told myself it was a small thing, that every person needs a room in their life where they can go and breathe. I respected that door like you respect a closed book you are not meant to read. We spoke about trying again, but we did not hurry. We let the idea sit on the table like a small flower in water. We checked on it now and then. Some days it seemed to open, some days it closed. My sister called on weeknights. "Have you eaten?" she asked. "Do you want to come over?" Sometimes I said yes, and I let her cook for me while we listened to music. Sometimes I said no, and she said, "Okay, I'm here anyway." His mom sent texts that said, "Made soup, it's on your porch." She knew to knock softly. She never asked about the shed. She never asked about trying again. She had learned to love in ways that did not press. Our friends started game night again, slowly, with small laughter that did not strain. Evan sometimes slipped out for a few minutes and came back smelling like cedar and cold air. He would sit close to me on the couch and put his hand on my knee under the blanket. I took his hand and held it there. We went on like that for a while. Work, dinner, small kindnesses, the glow of a bulb in the yard. I looked at the shed the way you look at a person you love when they are sleeping, careful, with respect, not wanting to disturb. I did not think of it as a secret. I thought of it as his place to heal. The lock on the shed always caught the sun. In the late afternoon, when I watered the herbs along the back steps, I would see it flash like a small coin. It was such a little thing, a neat silver circle on a plain door. I told myself it meant he cared about safety. I told myself it meant he was careful. One Monday, I was waiting for a book I had ordered for myself. It was a simple gardening book, the kind with pictures and easy steps. It did not come. I checked the mailbox twice. I felt silly walking out to the road again after dinner, scanning the empty box like it might change when I looked away. The next day, Evan came home with a small stack in his hands. "Mail was mixed up," he said. "Found this in my truck." He set it on the table and kissed my shoulder. My book was there, a little bent at the corner. I smiled because it was not a big thing. It was easy to let it go. Later that week, our neighbor, Mrs. Green, called across the fence when I was hanging towels to dry. "Left a package for you by the back," she said, her voice kind. "Your husband said it was better to put it near his workshop so it wouldn't get wet." I nodded and thanked her. I did not ask a question. I went around the house and found a small box leaning by the shed door. It was a jar of honey from my sister, wrapped in brown paper with her neat handwriting. I smiled. because it was like her to send something sweet. I wrote her a message and told her the honey had arrived safe. I did not say where I had found it. A few days later, Maya called me after dinner. "Did you get my postcard?" she asked, breath warm and close even over the phone. "The one with the red rocks and the big sky?" I paused. I had not. "Maybe it's on its way," I said. "Mail can be slow," she hummed. "I sent it a couple of weeks ago," she said gently, "but maybe you're right." I slept badly that night. It wasn't worry, not exactly. It was something softer, like a small ache behind the ribs. I told myself to be patient. I told myself not to build a mountain out of a postcard. The next morning, when I folded the laundry, a small slip of paper fell from the pocket of Evan's jacket. It was a pickup notice from the post office with my name on it. The date was from last week. I held it like it might break. When he came into the room, I showed it to him. He looked at it and then at me. "Oh," he said, careful, "that was nothing. I picked it up already and tossed the slip, must have stuck in there." He kissed my forehead. "It was junk." I nodded and put the slip in the trash. I did not ask what the junk had been. I told myself he was right. I told myself I did not need every detail about every letter. We were a team, and teams trust. We began to drift in small ways that were easy to miss if you were not looking. One night I asked, "Do you want to watch that old movie?" He said, "Maybe later. Let me finish something out back." I poured tea and watched the credits on my own, telling myself he would join me next time. At the library, a friend who ran a local newsletter walked up to the desk with a kind smile. "I mailed you our spring issue," she said, "with that article you asked me about." I blinked. "I didn't get it," I said, keeping my voice even. She tilted her head. "We had a lot returned last month," she said lightly. "It happens." I stood at the back door that night and watched Evan cross the yard. He moved like he knew exactly where his feet were supposed to go. The light clicked on in the shed. The lock glinted when he turned it. I folded my hands around my mug and told myself again that this was healthy. People need places to breathe. One Saturday, the mail carrier, a young woman I had not met before, smiled at me as she walked up the front path. "Hi there," she said. "Your husband said to leave anything bigger by that back shed so it doesn't get stolen off the porch." I nodded because it sounded practical. "Thank you," I said. After she left, I sat on the steps and listened to the birds. The sun warmed my knees. The lock on the shed glowed like an eye. We had small talks that were like walking on pebbles. They were not hard, just uneven. "How was your day?" I would ask. "Busy," he said. "Lots to do. Anything good happen?" "I fixed a cabinet door that would not close." He smiled a little. "It finally listened." We laughed, but the sound was thin. At night, I heard music from the shed, soft and old. Once it was a lullaby I knew from a neighbor's baby shower. It made my heart feel both full and empty. I pressed my hand to the kitchen counter and let the melody pass through me. When he came in, I did not mention the song. I thought about my father for the first time in a while. I had not spoken to him in years. When I was a teenager, his drinking had been a storm that pushed our house to its knees. When I met Evan, I told him about it once, sitting in the car by the river, words slow and careful. He had put his hand on the back of my neck and said, "I will keep you safe." It sounded good then. It sounded like love. Weeks passed. The tomatoes started to climb their stakes. I wrote a list for the grocery store and left a note on the fridge that said, "Buy more tea." When I came home, there was a second note under it, in Evan's handwriting, "Oil the lock." It was a practical reminder to himself, but I stood there and looked at it longer than I meant to. One afternoon, I found a small glossy card half under the mat at the back door. It was damp at the edges. My name was written on it in looping letters I recognized. It was from my aunt who visited Maya often. Inside, she had drawn a small flower and wrote, "Thinking of you." I smiled and felt a pinch of relief. I was still here. People were still reaching. Evan came in from outside and saw the card in my hand. "That must have slipped," he said, taking a towel and patting the damp corner. "I'll check the porch for more." He stepped past me gently and went out again. I watched him walk toward the shed. I watched him look at the lock, then look back at me, and then open the door. That evening, I asked quietly, "Do you think we could take a weekend away? Just a small drive, maybe the lake?" He put his fork down and glanced at the window. "Work is tight," he said softly. I'm sorry, maybe next month. I nodded. Next month. Sometimes I would go to bed and listen for the sound of his steps. He would come in late, smelling of cedar and clean air. He would lie down and face the wall for a while before turning to me. I would place my hand on his back. He would cover it with his own. We did not say much. The quiet was not heavy. It was just there. One day at the library, Maya called and said, "Dad asked me for your address." She paused, careful with her words. "He says he wrote to you last year and didn't hear back. He says he is sober now. He knows that does not change the past." I stood in the break room under the humming light. "I didn't get a letter," I said. "Not from him." We held the silence together. "Do you want me to tell him anything?" she asked. I swallowed. "Tell him I heard. Tell him I'm thinking." That night I told Evan that my father might have written. I expected him to frown or ask for more details. He only nodded once and said, "If he did, it might be for the best that you didn't see it right away." He spoke softly, like he was placing a blanket over a sleeping child. I looked at his face. "The best for who?" I asked, still calm. He looked down at his hands. "For you," he said. A week later, my friend Anne from the library said, "Did that set of essay books ever arrive at your house? I had them shipped there by mistake." I shook my head. "No," she frowned. "Weird, I'll file a claim." I said, "Thank you," but I felt that small ache again, the one that sits behind your ribs and waits. I started to notice how Evan always seemed to be at the front window around the time the mail truck came. He said it was to watch the dog next door, who liked to escape and run the street. Maybe that was true. He did love that dog, but the timing was neat in a way that felt like a straight line drawn by a careful hand. One morning he said, "The mailbox is wobbly, I'll fix it, don't reach into it until I do." He smiled, not in a hard way, just matter of fact. "I don't want you to cut your hand." I smiled back. "Okay." When he left for work, I walked down the path and touched the post. It did wiggle. The box door creaked. I pulled my hand back and wiped it on my skirt. I tried to give shape to what I felt, and the best I could do was this. It was like walking through a room and noticing that something has been moved. Not far, not wrong, just a little to the left. You tell yourself it does not matter, but your eyes keep going back to that spot. One evening, I put a birthday card for Evan in the mailbox early so he would find it when he checked. I thought it would be a sweet circle. He brings the mail, and there is something for him from me. 2 days later, he hugged me in the kitchen, and I asked, "Did you see your card?" He blinked. "What card?" I tried to laugh it off. "Oh," I said, "maybe it's still finding its way." On a Thursday, I came home to find a little bundle of twine on the kitchen counter, like the kind you use to tie packages. It had a small tag attached, the kind that says to and from. It was blank. "What's this?" I asked, lifting it gently. "Came with some supplies," he said, rinsing his hands in the sink. He did not turn around. "I'll toss it." I put it in the drawer instead, without knowing why. The radio in the shed began to play more often. Sometimes I heard the low voice of a sports announcer. Sometimes it was soft music from the 70s. Sometimes, late at night, it was quiet enough that I could hear paper moving, like envelopes being shuffled in a careful hand. I told myself I was being foolish. I went to bed. We grew polite in a way I did not like but could not find a way to change. "I'll be late," he would text. "Okay," I would write back. "Do you want me to keep dinner warm?" "Don't worry, eat." I would send a little heart. He would send a thumbs up. We spoke more with symbols than with voices some days. It felt thinner than air. On a windy afternoon, I found an envelope under the hydrangea by the porch. It had my name on it, and the stamp was smudged. The left edge was torn like it had been caught on something. Inside was a small pamphlet from the grief support group about a new meeting time. I smiled sadly. The wind had been wild yesterday. Things blow loose. It happens. Still, I checked the porch again like a reflex. Our neighbor, Mr. Perry, stopped me by the driveway when I was coming home from work. He is a kind man with a dog that always looks like it is smiling. "You two building something special?" he asked, eyes bright. "I hear Saw's late." I smiled. "He's always making something," I said. Mr. Perry nodded toward the shed. "He asked me once if I had spare boxes, said he needed to store a few gifts so they wouldn't clutter the house." He laughed. "I told him my garage is full of my own things." We both smiled. That night at dinner, I said softly, "I miss you sometimes." He looked up, fork paused. "I'm right here," he said, voice warm. I know, I said, and I did. He was right there. But there are different kinds of being there. We did not fight. There was nothing to throw at each other. We had matching plates and matching patience. When I asked, "What are you making out there?" he answered, "Little things, boxes, a shelf." He was not lying, or if he was, it was not mean. He just gave me a small piece of a larger shape. I decided not to go to the post office and ask about anything. I decided not to follow the trail of a postcard in my mind. I folded those thoughts like laundry and put them away. Every time they slipped out of the drawer, I put them back. Then Maya called on a Sunday morning. Her voice was quiet. "I'm coming by this afternoon with a box from Mom," she said. She cleaned out a closet, quilts and towels, nothing heavy. I said, "Okay, I'll put the kettle on." She came with a smile and a hug and set the box by the door. We drank tea and talked about nothing hard. When she left, I went to pick up the box. It was lighter than I expected. I opened it to put the towels in the wash. Under two folded dishcloths were small, crocheted baby blankets that I had never seen before. They were soft and pale and smelled faintly of cedar. I ran my hand over them and closed the lid. I sat on the floor beside the box and listened to my breath. Evan came in a few minutes later. He saw the box and the way I was looking at it. He crouched down slow. "Mom made those months ago," he said, barely above a whisper. "She didn't want to push. I told her I'd keep them safe." I nodded and put the lid back on. "Thank you," I said, because even in my confusion, I could see his care in it. But I also saw something else. A choice had been made without me. That night, I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling. The glow from the shed was a faint square on our wall. The wind moved the leaves. He came in and lay down, his breath even. I watched the square fade as the light clicked off. The darkness did not feel mean. It felt like a heavy blanket I could not push away. A few days later, I called Lydia and asked about the blankets. I did not accuse, I asked. "I made them when you first shared the news," she said, her voice thoughtful. "I set them aside well after. I didn't want to hurt you. Evan said he'd hold them until you were ready." I thanked her. I told her they were beautiful. When I hung up, I sat very still and listened to the old house breathe. I tried again to make a place for us to meet in the middle. "Do you want to come with me to the group on Thursday?" I asked. "We could go for ice cream after." He smiled a little like he wanted to say yes. "You go," he said softly. "Bring me a cup home." "What flavor?" "Vanilla." He kissed my cheek and went out back. The next morning, I saw him oil the lock. He did it with such care, a small cloth in his hand, fingers gentle. I watched from the kitchen window and felt a kind of tenderness and a kind of distance at the same time. He was caring for something he loved. He was caring for something he did not share. In the late afternoon, a package arrived. I was home, which was rare at that hour. The carrier set it on the front porch. I opened the door to thank her. Before I could step out, I saw Evan turn the corner of the house, quick but not rushed, pick up the box and head toward the shed. He stopped when he saw me and lifted the box a little as if to show me it was nothing. "Just some parts," he said. "For a job." I smiled. "Okay." That evening I asked, "Do you think our mail is getting lost?" He paused. "Sometimes," he said. "This town's post office is small." I nodded. "Maya's postcard didn't make it," I said, and I let the words hang there. He reached across the table and took my hand. "I don't want you to be hurt," he said, looking down at our fingers. I squeezed his hand. "Buy a postcard?" I asked, and my voice was gentle. He did not answer. I began to notice how the shed door was always closed when I walked outside, even if I only stepped out for a minute. If I opened the back door too quickly, I could hear the click, solid and simple, like a heartbeat. It did not feel like a warning. It felt like a habit. On a rainy day, I found the birthday card I had written to him, still sealed, on the floor of the truck when I climbed in to move it for the trash pickup. It had slid under the seat. I held it for a moment and then put it back on the dashboard. That night, he found it and smiled. "I thought I lost this," he said, opening it at the table and reading the simple words. He kissed my hand. "Thank you." It should have been enough to let the ache go. Instead, it only paused. We were good at small acts of care. He changed the light bulb in the hallway. I sewed a button back on his shirt. I baked banana bread. He made sure my car had gas. Our lives moved forward in steady steps. The questions walked alongside us, quiet and patient. One evening, as I was bringing in the herbs to dry, I heard his voice from the shed, low and even. He was on the phone. "No," he said. Please hold any packages under my name until I come by. He listened and then added, It's a surprise. He used that word like it had a weight. I stood still. I did not move closer. I went inside and set the herbs on the counter. We started to eat later and later. He would say, Don't wait up, and I would wait anyway because I liked us being at the table together. When we did sit down, we would be kind. This is good, he would say, nodding at the soup. Thank you, I would say. The spaces between our words were longer than they used to be. They did not need to be filled, but I missed the sound of our ordinary. I told myself to be grateful. We were not shouting. We were not slamming doors. We were two people carrying a soft hurt carefully between us. Some nights that felt like grace. Some nights it felt like a silence that had forgotten how to speak. Maya called again and told me that Dad had sent a small package to the house. He said it was a photo, she said. From a long time ago, I swallowed. I didn't see it, I said. Maybe it's lost. She exhaled slowly. Do you want me to tell him to stop? She asked. I looked at the shed through the kitchen window and saw the faint glow. No, I said, even softer. Tell him to do what he needs to do. I will do what I need to do. That night when Evan came in, I said, If anything comes here for me, I want to see it. He nodded, and his eyes were kind and tired. Of course, he said. I watched him wash his hands. He scrubbed longer than he needed to. The water ran and ran. He turned it off and dried them carefully. A small part of me wanted to open the shed and settle the questions. A larger part of me wanted to keep the trust we had built, even if it was thinner in places. I thought about the day we had stood under the mild wind and promised kindness. I thought about boundaries and safety and love. I told myself I could live with not knowing. The next morning, when I stepped out to water the herbs, a corner of a white envelope was caught between the porch boards. I bent down and pulled it out gently. The paper had a clean feel. My name was there. The return address was my father's. The stamp was old. I held it for a moment and then walked inside with it, my heart steady but fast. I put it on the table and stood there. The house hummed softly, the way old houses do. I did not open it. I wanted to be the person who held trust like a bird in her hands. I wanted to be the person who listened before she moved. I left the envelope on the table and went to work. When I came home, the envelope was gone. In its place was a small note in Evan's hand. Stopped by the post office. They had more. We'll talk tonight. I stood in the kitchen with that note in my fingers and felt the air around me shift a little, like I had stepped into a cooler room. That evening, he and I sat at the table with 2 cups of tea. He looked at the wood grain and traced a line with his finger. Your father, he said quietly, has been trying to reach you. He paused. I thought it might be better to wait. He lifted his eyes to mine. I wanted to protect you. My chest tightened, not in anger, but in a deep kind of sadness that does not have a loud voice. From what? I asked. He took a breath. From pain, he said. He looked at the window, at the faint shape of the shed in the dusk. From the way it can knock you down when you are already on your knees. I nodded slowly. I understand that, I said. I do. I folded my hands and felt the small knot of ache, round and smooth, sitting in my palm. But I want to choose that for myself. He nodded. He was not cold. He was not unkind. He was just certain in a way that made my certainty feel small. We did not raise our voices. We did not move our chairs back. We sat there a long time with the tea growing cold. He reached out and took my hand. I love you, he said, and I believed him. I said, I love you, and I meant it. Later, when he went outside, I stood by the back door and watched. He crossed the yard. He unlocked the shed. The light bloomed. The lock shone just for a second like it always did. It was late summer and the air smelled like cut grass. I listened to the soft sound of paper and radio and quiet work. I told myself one more time that trust was stronger than fear. Still, in the quiet that followed, the feeling stayed. It was the ache of doubt, the kind that does not demand, only asks. It asked the same question over and over. What is love if it keeps your eyes closed? I did not answer. I pulled the curtains gently and turned off the kitchen light. The yard fell into a softer dark, where the shed light glowed like a small moon. As the days moved forward, I tried to live like I always had. I went to the library. I made dinner. I called my sister. I watered the herbs. All the while, the little questions were pebbles in my pocket. They were not heavy, but they were always there. And the lock, bright as ever in the sun, watched me cross the yard each evening, as if it had a memory of every time I chose to turn away. The night the storm came in, the sky felt heavy, like it was thinking. Wind moved the trees in a steady rhythm. Rain started as a whisper and then turned to a full voice against the windows. The lights flickered once, twice, and then steadied. The house seemed to hold its breath. Evan was late. He had texted that a job had run over because of the weather. I set a mug on the table for him anyway. I took a blanket to the couch and listened to the gutters. I tried to read, but the words did not settle. When the lights flickered again, I went to the drawer for candles. I set a few on the table and by the sink. The little flames made soft circles of light. The rest of the room was a quiet blue. I could hear the shed door rattle once in the wind and then go still. A jacket hung by the back door, damp at the cuffs. He must have grabbed his old one for the rain and left this behind. I lifted it to put it on a chair so it could dry, and something heavy in the pocket slid down and tapped the floor. It was a small sound, like a coin. I crouched and reached under the chair. My fingers found cool metal. It was the key, not just any key. The key I had seen in his hand as he crossed the yard each evening. The key that matched the glint of that silver lock. I held it in my palm and felt its weight, small and sure. I stood there for a minute. The rain was steady. The candles moved a little in the draft. I looked at the back door and then at the jacket and then at the key. My heart did not race. It simply beat, slow and steady, like steps on a familiar path. I told myself I could put it back. I told myself I could wait. I said the word trust in my head and tried to feel it the way I used to. In my mind, I saw the cradle in the guest room, quiet under its thin layer of dust. I saw the bowl of fruit on the table, the list on the fridge, the lock in the sun. Another gust came and pressed the rain flat against the glass. I thought of the envelopes I had found under the porch boards. I thought of my name in other people's hands. I thought of the small ache that had been sitting with me for months, patient and gentle, but there. I closed my hand around the key. I put on my shoes. I lifted a raincoat from the hook and pulled up the hood. I did not want to wake the neighbors with the sound of the door, so I turned the handle slowly. The night felt like a cool hand on my face. I stepped onto the back step and made my way across the yard. The grass was slick. Water pooled near the tomato fence. The shed stood where it always had, as if it had grown there. The lock shone, even in the storm, catching the porch light from the house in a small wink. I lifted my hand and touched it. For a second, I just stood with the key under my thumb. I thought of the day he had asked me not to open this door. He had been calm. He had said he did not want me to get hurt. I had said I trusted him. That was true then. It was still true now, but it lived beside other truths. I slid the key into the lock. The metal was cold. The turn was smooth, like something that had been cared for. The sound of it opening was soft but clear. It made me think of a quiet yes. The door stuck at the bottom the way old doors do when the wood swells. I pressed my shoulder against it and pushed. It gave with a small sigh. The smell that came out was clean cedar, warm dust, and machine oil. It was a smell I knew from his sleeves and from the way his hair sometimes carried a hint of it at night. Inside, it was dark with only the storm light. I felt for the pull chain and tugged. The bulb warmed the room with a soft glow. The walls were lined with shelves he had built himself. The workbench was neat in a way that told me he liked to put things where they belonged. Tools hung in rows. A tiny radio sat on the corner, silent. At first, it looked like any workshop. Small wooden birds on a shelf, sanded smooth. A handful of spoons with long, gentle handles. A little box with dovetail corners that fit together like a puzzle. His pencil lay by the vise, a sharp point and a soft smear where his fingers always held it. Then I saw the boxes. They were not big and they were not many. They were simple cardboard, the kind with lids that lift. Each had a small tag on string, the same kind I had found once with the twine in our kitchen. The tags were written in his careful hand. Hold, later, for when she is ready. I stepped closer. The first box was labeled Maya. Inside were postcards, tied with thin twine. The The top one was the red rocks and the big sky. I knew it before I saw the words. I lifted it with both hands. "Thinking of you every mile," it said. The date in the corner was last spring. Under the postcards was a small scarf, knit simple with a little tag in Maya's handwriting. "For your walks." I held it to my face and breathed. It smelled faintly of soap and a hint of something like oranges. I put it back, careful, like I was laying down a sleeping bird. The next box was Dad. My breath changed. It did not tighten. It slowed. Inside were letters, a stack with worn edges. Some had not been opened. Some had been. There was a small envelope with a picture peeking out. I lifted the first letter and saw his handwriting, not neat but steady. "Dear Lou," it began. He used my family name. The one only he and my sister ever used. "I am 9 months sober. I know that does not fix what I broke. I want to try to make something different with what is left. I am in a program. They told me to write, so I am writing." I read to the end where he wrote, "If you do not write back, I will understand. I will still be here." I looked at the stamp. It was last year, under it was another. 10 months today, it said. In this one, he tucked a small coin, a metal chip with a number on it. It slid into my palm like a smooth stone from a river. I closed my hand around it and felt its simple truth. There was a small box within the box, wrapped once in brown paper and tied with string. The paper had a tear on one corner as if someone had looked and then closed it again. A note was taped to the top in my father's handwriting. "This was your grandmother," it said. My hands shook, not with rage, but with a sadness that was deep and quiet. Under the paper was a pendant with a small blue stone. It shone in the shedding light like a drop of rain. I did not wear it. I put it back on the paper and rested my hand on top for a long second. I heard the rain on the roof and a far-off sizzle of tires on wet roads. In the box were more letters, some with the dates written large at the tops, like he was marking the days he had kept his promise to himself. I moved to the next box. "Library," the tag said. Inside was the spring newsletter rolled gently and tied. It had a paper band with my friend's logo. There was a sticky note on it in her handwriting. "Your article on grief and fiction sits on page 3. Thought you'd like it." I saw my own name printed small. I brushed my finger over it and felt a small ache of pride and a larger ache of loss. Under the newsletter was a small package cut open along the side. It was the set of essay books Anne had asked me about, still wrapped in clear plastic. A note on top in Evan's writing said, "To return to Anne." The note was not mean. It was brisk. It was like he was trying to keep a counter clean. There was a box marked group. In it were flyers from the community center, new times for meetings, a note from the coordinator with a handwritten line, "We miss your quiet presence." There was a little slip under that with a volunteer form. "Would you consider facilitating 1 week?" it asked. The signature had a smile drawn like a small sun. There was also a box with no label. Inside were small gifts I recognized only by the thought in them. A tea towel with a hand-stitched border, the kind my aunt made in the winter. A bookmark with my name burned into thin wood, the letters dark and soft at the edges. A tiny music box that played a few bars of a lullaby when I turned the handle. It was the same song I had heard once from the shed late at night. I listened to it and pressed my lips together to keep my breath steady. On the back shelf, a heavier box was marked photos. I lifted the lid. There was a picture on top of me at 2 years old, standing barefoot in the grass, cheeks full, eyes stubborn. Behind me, my father sat on a step, young and tired, holding a hose like it was a snake he had to watch. On the back in my mother's writing was a date. I felt a wash of love for that small person I had been, fierce and soft. I held the picture to my chest and then put it back. There were notes scattered among the boxes in Evan's hand, little half-ideas. Ask doctor about triggers. Find words for when she wakes at 3 a.m., keep the house light. Work outside more. And on one tag, tied to a bundle of letters with twine, were 5 words that made my breath catch. For when she is ready. I stood very still. The shed felt both full and very empty. The storm outside gave the sense that the world was washing itself. I could feel what he had tried to do. He had gathered the sharp things and put them in a box. He had tried to make a room where the pain lived so the rest of the house could be safe. But my name was on those envelopes. My name was on the scarf. My name was in the newsletter. The room where the pain lived was also the room where my life had kept trying to knock on the door, and the door had stayed closed to me. I sat on a small stool by the workbench. I laid some of the letters out in a row. I did not rush. I read one from my father that began, "I saw a heron today, and it made me think of the way you used to stand on one leg when you were little." I smiled because I could see myself doing that. Then I cried, but the tears came quiet. They were soft on my face like warm rain. I wiped my cheeks with the cuff of my coat and looked around the shed again. There was a wooden box on a high shelf, and I recognized the long grain of the wood. He had shown me a piece like that once and said he loved how it held light. On the lid of this box, carved into the surface, were the smallest letters, L. My hand shook the least when I reached for that one. Inside were more envelopes, some from friends I had not seen in a while. One that was clearly from a cousin who always wrote with a blue pen that ran a little in the rain. There were also cards from his mother, Lydia, with careful lines like, "Thinking of you, honey," and no need to write back. At the very bottom of the box was an envelope with no name, only a date. It was the week after the hospital. I opened it and found not a letter but one of Evan's little birds, carved with a short message in pencil on its belly. "I do not know how to help." A second line was lighter, like he had tried to press without leaving a mark. "So I am keeping watch." I sat for a long time, the bird in my palm, the storm around me, the little bulb humming. The sound on the roof shifted and eased. It was the kind of rain that moves on without fanfare. I thought of all the times I had watched the glow from this shed and told myself that love can live with small mysteries. I had not understood how large this mystery had become. The door opened behind me without a creak. I felt the air change first, a cooler breath at my back. "Lou!" Evan's voice was low and careful. I turned. He was framed by the doorway, rain on his shoulders, his hair damp and flat. He did not step in at first. His eyes moved over the boxes and the letters and my hands. "I used the key," I said. My voice was soft. "It fell out of your jacket." He nodded. His face did not harden. He looked like someone who had been walking toward a wave and knew it would reach him sooner or later. He stepped inside and closed the door gently against the wind. He looked at the box labeled Dad. He looked at the pendant on the paper. He looked at the postcard with the red rocks and my aunt's tea towel. He put his hands in his pockets and then took them out again, like he did not know what to do with them. For a moment, neither of us spoke. "I thought I was doing the right thing," he said. The words were steady, like he had practiced them alone. "I thought I was holding the sharp edges so you didn't have to cut your hands on them." He looked at me then, eyes only. "I wanted to keep you safe." I set the little bird on the workbench. I placed my hands flat on either side of it to keep them from shaking. "I hear you," I said. "I believe that you thought that." I took a slow breath. "But this is my name. This is my pain. This is my life." My voice did not rise. It just filled the small space between us. He swallowed and nodded. "I know," he said. "I see it now. I should have asked you. I should have told you when they came." He glanced at the boxes, at the notes with his handwriting. "I was afraid you would fall apart. I did not know how to pick up the pieces if you did." "I might have fallen apart," I said, "but I wanted to choose when and how." I looked at the letters again, at their different shapes and colors. I wanted to see my own name when it came to the door. The last word caught in my throat, not hard, just tender. And I wanted to trust that you would stand next to me, not in front of me. Evan stepped closer, but not too close. He reached for the pendant and then pulled his hand back. "Your father's letters," he began, and then stopped. He tried again. "Some of them were angry, some of them were good. I read a few to see if they would hurt you." He shook his head. "That was wrong. I am sorry." I looked at him and saw the man who had asked me at a small table by the river if I liked cornbread. I saw the man who oiled the lock like it was a living thing. I saw the man who rubbed wood smooth until it felt like water. The love I felt did not vanish. It stood beside the hurt, quiet and true. "What did you think would happen?" I asked, not to trap him, but because I wanted to understand. "Did you think we would live here and you would keep everything that might make me cry?" He closed his eyes for a second. "I thought I could keep it here," he said softly. "In this room, until the day it felt lighter. I thought I could give it to you then when you were strong." "And who decides when I am strong?" I asked. His answer was the smallest shake of his head. He did not say me. He did not say you. He looked like a man who had just realized the size of a map he had been reading upside down for years. We stood in the shed, the rain a little softer, the bulb a little warmer with time. He said, "I was so scared after the hospital." He spoke like he was confessing to a quiet lake. "I watched you breathe in your sleep. Sometimes I put my hand near your face to feel it. I started to think that if I kept the world neat enough, I could keep you safe." He lifted a hand and let it fall. It got away from me. I picked up one of the letters from my father and laid it in his hand. "This is not the world," I said. "This is me. This is mine." He looked down at the paper, and a tear fell on it and made a dark spot near the edge. He did not brush it away. He just watched it sink in. "I wanted to protect you," he whispered. I nodded. "I know," I said, "and I wanted to trust you." The words were not a knife. They were a door. We could both feel it. We sat down, him on a low stool, me on the edge of the workbench chair. The boxes were between us like small islands. We were careful with our hands. We were careful with our eyes. He reached for the box labeled library and pushed it gently toward me. "These were not mine to hold," he said. "I see that now." He looked for the right word and chose a simple one. "I am sorry." "I wish you had told me sooner," I said. "I wish I had asked sooner." We were not making a list of mistakes to count. We were just putting the pieces on the table so we could see their shapes. He took a slow breath. "What do we do now?" he asked. The question hung in the air, quiet and deep. I looked around the shed, the tools, the spoons, the carved birds, the little radio that had played soft lullabies into the night. I looked at the lock on the inside of the door, thick and simple. "I need to read them," I said. "I need to open the boxes and read my letters and choose what to do with each one." He nodded. "Okay," I added, "and I need to do that out there," I said, tipping my head toward the house. "At our table, in the light, not in a place where I was not welcome." He closed his eyes again like he was accepting a truth he did not like but respected. "Okay," he said, "we will do that." We carried the boxes to the door. The rain had softened to a steady hush. He held the door for me, careful as he had always been. We crossed the yard, our shoes sinking into soft ground, our hands full of paper and thread and the years we had not shared. Inside the house, I set the boxes on the table and lit the candles again. The power had steadied, but the candles felt honest. Evan stood across from me, his hands empty now. He looked smaller somehow, not shorter but less sure. It made me want to hold his face and also to step back. I did neither. "I need to say something," I said. He nodded. "You can say anything." "I love you," I said. "That has not left, but something inside me has shifted. It feels like a floorboard moved. I am standing on the same porch, but my foot knows the spot is different now." He listened, eyes steady. "I do not know yet what that means for us, but I cannot pretend I do not feel it." He swallowed. "I feel it too," he said. "I am the one who moved the board. I am sorry." His voice did not break. It softened in a way I had not heard before. "I will help fix it if fixing is what we can do." We were both quiet. The rain made its steady sound. A car hissed past on the street and then was gone. The house seemed to exhale. I opened one more letter. It was from my father months after the first. "I planted tomatoes," he wrote. "They are not doing very well. I am learning to ask for advice." I smiled at the small honesty of it. I passed the letter to Evan. He read it and nodded, eyes moving slow. "I can fix a fence," he said. "I do not know how to fix this." "We can try," I said, "but not by locking the hard things away." I put my hand on the table, palm down. He put his near it, not on top, just close. We sat like that for a while, two hands of two people who loved each other and had hurt each other without raising their voices. When it was late, I carried the dad box to the guest room and set it on the small desk. I left the door open. I wanted the air to move through. Evan stood at the doorway and watched me. "Do you want me to stay?" he asked, gentle. I shook my head. "Not tonight," I said. "I need a little room." He nodded and stepped back. "I'll be in the living room," he said, "if you need me." I did not say yes. I did not say no. He turned off the hallway light and went away. I sat at the desk with a candle and the letters and the little pendant in its paper. I put my finger on the blue stone and felt its coolness. I thought of my grandmother's hands. I thought of my father's handwriting. I thought of the man who had oiled a lock to keep danger out and had kept so much of me out, too. The rain slowed. The night thinned. I could hear the slow rhythm of the clock in the living room. I could hear Evan shift on the couch and then go still. I read until the words blurred. I rested my head on my arms and listened to the house breathe around me. In the morning, the light was pale. My eyes were tired. I stood and stretched and went to the kitchen. Evan was there, sitting at the table, his hands wrapped around a mug he had not drunk from. He looked up. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning," I said. The words felt different in the room, like they were wearing new shoes. We did not rush to decide. We did not make grand plans. We sat with what was true. We named it without yelling. The tenderness between us had broken, but it had not turned to anger. It had turned to something slower and heavier. It asked us to be honest in a new way. "I do not know if I can be who I was," I said. He nodded. "Me neither," he said. "Maybe we are not supposed to be." He touched the edge of a letter with one finger and pulled his hand back like it was hot. "I want to be good," he said, almost like a child. I wanted to be good. "I know," I said. "So did I." We looked at each other for a long time. There was love there. There was also a line we had crossed that could not be uncrossed. The shed door was open now, and it would always have been opened once, no matter what we did next. The sky outside was washed clean by the storm. The lock on the shed, even from the kitchen window, was a small bright circle in the sun. It was not the enemy. It was a symbol, and symbols are hard to live with when they belong to both people and to neither. I stood and poured him fresh coffee. He stood and found a plate for toast. We moved around each other with the care of people who know where the sharp things are. When we sat again, I took a breath and let it out slowly. "Today," I said, "I am going to call my sister. I am going to call the community center. I am going to write to my father." I looked at him. "And you and I need to talk to someone, a counselor." He nodded once. "Okay," he said, "I will go with you." We sat with that plan. It was small and it was real. The truth had broken something tender between us. It had also made room. It had made a space for speaking without hiding. It had called us into a hard honesty. We did not touch hands across the table that morning. We sat with our cups, quiet and steady. The house was different. We were different. The shed door was open, and the contents of that little room had walked into our home and sat down at our table like guests who had been waiting for a very long time. Outside, the birds tried out their voices after the rain. Somewhere down the street, a child laughed. Life went on in its simple way. We listened to it. We listened to each other breathe. And we both knew, without saying it out loud, that we had reached a place we could not go back from, only through. We called a counselor the next morning. Her name was Ruth. Her voice on the phone was calm, like a soft hand. She asked us to come in together, and she found a time that same week. I wrote it on a scrap of paper and stuck it to the fridge with a magnet shaped like a bird. Her office was small and bright. A fern sat in the corner by the window. The chairs were simple and comfortable. There was a box of tissues on a low table and a small bowl of smooth stones. Ruth greeted us like we were neighbors, not problems. She did not ask for the whole story at once. She said, "Tell me what brings you here in this season." I spoke first because the words were close to the surface. "We love each other," I said, "and something broke." Evan nodded. He looked at his hands and then at her. "I locked up a part of her life," he said. "I thought it was care." Ruth did not rush. She let the sentences find their own pace. She asked us what the shed meant to each of us. I said, "It was a place for his work. Then it became a place where I was missing." Evan said, "It was where I could put the hard things when I did not know how to hold them." She nodded and looked between us. "What did the lock mean?" she asked. I said, "Safety at first, then silence." Evan said, "Action, I cannot fix grief, I can turn a key." He smiled a little, but it was tired. It helped me feel useful. Ruth asked if we could make a new agreement, one that honored both of us. She called it a boundary. It was not a wall. It was a line you could walk along together. We said yes. We were both ready to stop guessing. That night at the table, we made small rules. They were simple. We put a basket by the front door for all mail. "You open what has your name," I said, and he nodded. "I will not read your letters," he said, and I nodded. If something came that felt heavy, we would place it on the table and ask, "Do you want company?" We hung the shed key on a hook by the back door. It was in plain sight right under the window. He said, "You can come in any time." I said, "I might not," and he understood. The lock stayed, but it was no longer a secret. It was like a seatbelt. It had a purpose, and it was not control. We started doing slow talks at the table after dinner. We did not always have a topic. Sometimes we just took turns saying one thing about the day that was real. "I felt lonely at 3, I would say. He would nod and say, "I heard a song at work and had to stand still for a minute." These were small bricks. We were building something honest with them. I called the community center and told them I had found the flyers. The coordinator said, "We wondered how you were." I said, "I was quiet for a while. I would like to come back." She said, "Come as you are." I wrote the meeting time on my hand and went. I told the group about the shed, not to blame, but to name. People nodded in that way people do when they have walked a road with a different name but the same hills. When it was over, I stayed and stacked chairs with the coordinator. I told her I would like to volunteer a little. "You can take the sign-up sheet next week," she said with a smile. "That is already something." I called my sister. I told her about the letters. "I am sorry," she said softly. "I didn't know." I told her I knew. She came over with a bag of oranges and 2 fresh notebooks. "For writing," she said. "One for now, one for later." We sat on the porch and peeled the oranges. The smell was bright. The wind moved the leaves in a careful way. I wrote to my father. My first letter was short. "I have your letters now," I wrote. "I am reading them. I am not ready for a long conversation. I can meet you at the park for half an hour next week. Maya will come with me." I signed my name the way I do when I am sure of myself, full and even. He wrote back. He said, "I will be there. I will bring a coffee for you. Tell me how you take it." I smiled and wrote, "Milk, no sugar." It felt like a small, normal thing, and it did not scare me. It felt like setting a table. On the day of the meeting, the sky was high and the park was quiet. Maya sat on one side of me. I held the pendant from my grandmother, cool under my sweater. When my father walked up, he looked thinner and older, but his eyes were steady. He stood a few steps away and said, "Thank you for coming." I nodded and said, "Hello." We sat on a bench and watched a little boy chase a paper boat in the stream. My father held his coffee with both hands like he was afraid it would float away. He said, "I am sorry." He said it once, not in a long string, not to tie me down. He said it like putting a stone on the ground so I could see it. I told him I was not ready to talk about everything. I told him about the shed and how the letters came to me all at once. He closed his eyes and opened them slowly. "That was not his to do," he said, his voice quiet. "But I can see how a man might think it is brave to hold a door." I nodded. His words did not excuse. They simply recognized. We met again a week later and again a month later. Sometimes Maya came. Sometimes she did not. We stayed in the open air. We kept the meetings short. When I got tired, I said, "I need to stop now," and he said, "Okay," every time. He brought a small photo once of my mother holding me in a kitchen with light on the floor. I put it in my purse and did not look at it until I was home. At counseling, Ruth asked us to make a ritual around the letters we had kept from the shed. "Rituals make room," she said. We chose Sunday afternoons. We made tea. We sat at the table and opened 2 letters or 3. If they were simple, we smiled. If they hurt, we breathed. If they were heavy, we paused and walked around the house once together and then sat down again. Sometimes we read in silence and only touched hands at the end. Sometimes we read out loud. When something stirred up old grief, Evan would listen and say, "I hear that." He did not tell me to be strong. He did not offer to keep anything for later. He let later arrive when it did. I wrote to Anne at the library and apologized about the essay books. "It was a mix-up," I wrote, and I did not explain further. She wrote back with a small heart drawn next to her name in ink that bled a little. She said, "I'm glad you are all right." I returned the books with a plate of cookies for the staff room. They made a small, bright pile on the table. In our slow talks, we visited old rooms between us and opened their windows. I told him I had felt like a child again when the letters disappeared. He nodded, and I saw him swallow. He said, "I wanted to be useful. I was afraid of the kind of pain you cannot fix." I told him, "I would rather hurt with you than heal without you." He covered his eyes with one hand and let a slow tear fall. Lydia came by one afternoon with a bag of bread from a bakery that still used paper bags. She stood at the counter with me and buttered a slice, then cut it in half. We ate in silence, then she put her plate down. "I did not know about the letters," she said. "If I had known, I would have told him to put them on your pillow." I smiled a little at the picture of that. "Thank you," I said. She told me she had made the blankets in a rush of hope and then hidden them from herself in a closet. "I thought I was being kind," she said. "My mother taught me that if you keep things quiet, life moves smoother." She shook her head at the sink. "It does not. It only moves quieter." We hugged by the window, two women who had tried to be gentle with the wrong part sometimes. The shed changed shape in my mind and in the yard. Evan began to keep the door open while he worked. He would say, "I'm out back if you need me," and I would sometimes step onto the porch and listen to the small sounds that used to make my chest tighten. Now, they sounded like someone breathing. He showed me what he was making. He had always made small birds, but now he carved little boxes with open tops, no lids. "They are nests," he said with a shy smile. "Nests don't lock." I ran my finger along the smooth edge and felt something inside me soften. We took the lock off the shed door one Saturday. It had done its job. It could rest. We put it in a drawer with old keys and a handful of screws. The hook by the back door stayed empty for a while, then I hung a small wind chime there. It made a tiny sound when the window was open and a breeze came through. Ruth gave us words that we used like tools. She said repair, not fix. Fixing meant no crack ever happened. Repair meant seeing the place and honoring it. She said consent, even in the smallest parts of daily life. "Do you want to talk about this now?" was a sentence she wanted us to learn by heart. We practiced. We got better. One week, she asked us to bring something that represented our hope. Evan brought a photo of the cradle in the guest room corner. I brought the pendant with the blue stone. He said his hope was to make a place safe enough that a child would not need locks. I said my hope was to be a person who could open and close her own doors in her own time. We did not try for a baby, not then. We let that hope sit like a book on a shelf. We touched its spine sometimes. We did not take it down. We understood that love could not be a way to hide from work. We needed to learn a new way to be first. I started writing in the evenings, just a page. Sometimes it was a memory of something small, like the way the lemon light looked on the porch railing. Sometimes it was the shape of a sentence I had heard at group that stayed with me. "Grief is not a project," Ruth had said once. "Grief is a relationship." I wrote that at the top of a page and left it there, plain and quiet. Anne asked me if I would write a short piece for the library newsletter. "Just a few lines," she said, "on what the library means to you." I wrote about open doors and quiet rooms and the way someone will point to a shelf and say, "Try here." When the newsletter came in the mail and I held it in my hands, I felt a small childlike joy. I took it to the table and read it out loud to Evan. He listened and smiled with his whole face. Maya and I grew closer in an easy way. We learned to call each other at odd times just to say, "I am here." She came with me to see our father get his 1-year coin. It was in a church basement under a yellow light. People hugged him and then sat back down. He cried and then he laughed and then he sat very still. After, we went for pie. He did not ask for more than I could give. He said, "I like being in a room with you." I said, "Me too," and meant it. Not everything was smooth. Some days I heard the sound of paper moving and felt my shoulders stiffen. Some days Evan watched the mail truck from the window and then caught himself and stepped back, embarrassed. We would name the moment out loud. "I'm tense," I would say. "I am watching for nothing," he would say. Numbing did not make the feeling vanish, but it kept it from growing in the dark. We found small ways to offer repair. I fixed the loose button on his favorite shirt without being asked and left it on the bed. He planted mint in a new pot for me and wrote for tea on a little stake. I found a postcard at a thrift store with a picture of the red rocks and mailed it to Maya from our own mailbox. She sent a message that said, "Look at us," with a heart. We did look. It helped. Our talks with Ruth went deeper. We spoke about control and care. She said, "They can wear the same coat." We talked about our childhood houses, about how noise used to mean danger for me and how silence used to mean love for him. We learned to stand in the doorway between those rooms and look both ways. I told Evan once in a session, "I still love you." He nodded and said, "I still love you too." He reached across and held my wrist gently, just a few seconds. We both knew that love was there. We also knew love had been asked to carry something it could not carry alone. There was a night when a package came and I was not home. When I came back, it was on the table, unopened, with my name facing up. Next to it was a note in Evan's hand. "This came. I did not look. I will be outside if you want company." I opened it and sat down on the floor because my knees felt soft. It was a small book from my father about birds with a note, "For the little wooden ones too." I smiled through tears and called out, "Come in." Evan came and sat on the floor beside me. He did not touch the book. He put his hand on the rug and waited. After a long minute, I placed my hand on top of his, and we breathed together. We started walking in the evenings again. Down by the lake, we would sit in the car or on the bench and watch the water move. We did not hold hands every time. Sometimes we did. Sometimes we just shared a thermos and took turns. There were nights we laughed easily and nights we were quiet the whole time. Both were honest. I went back to the support group and took a small role helping set up. One week, the facilitator asked if I would lead a check-in. My voice trembled at first, then steadied. I said, "We're going to go slow." People nodded. We went slow. After the meeting, a woman told me, "Your calm helps." I held that in my hands like a small pebble and took it home. At home, we learned a new way to live around each other. We told the truth in small pieces. "I am still angry some days," I said once, folding dish towels in the kitchen. Evan dried a bowl and said, "I am angry at myself." He did not ask me not to be angry. He did not tell me to move on. He said, "I am here while you feel it." Trust did not return the way a light comes back in a room. It did not click. It came like the slow brightening of dawn on a cloudy morning. There were patches where it was still dim. There were places where it surprised us with a soft, clear stripe of sun. We let it be what it was. We did not demand it to be a noonday when it was barely becoming morning. We had nights when we slept back to back and reached for each other at the same time. We had nights when we turned out the light and lay there, awake, thinking different thoughts. We did not mistake the quiet for a cure. We did not mistake a good day for the whole story. I started wearing my grandmother's pendant some days. It rested at the soft place at my throat. When I needed courage, I touched it with my fingertips. When people asked about it, I said, "It was my grandmother," and left it there. Some truths did not need to be told to the whole world. Maya and I put a small basket by my front door labeled, "For Lou." It was a joke and a promise. She would sometimes leave a postcard or an apple there if she came by when I was at work. The basket made me smile when I walked in. It reminded me that my life was allowed to reach me directly. I wrote longer letters to my father. I told him about the herbs on the back steps and the way the mint wanted more water on hot days. I told him about the library and the children's story hour where a toddler fell asleep in the middle of the rug like a cat. I told him about the lake. I did not tell him everything. I did not need to. He wrote back with stories of the meetings he went to, the people he met there, the day a man brought his own son and cried with his head in his hands. "I am learning to keep my hands open," he wrote. I read the sentence twice. There was a day when Evan asked if he could come to group with me. "Not to speak," he said, "just to listen." I said he could. He sat beside me in a metal chair and held his posture a little too straight. After, he told me the quiet in the room felt like a soft blanket. "I used to think I needed to keep the wind out," he said, "but sometimes the wind is how the room breathes." We made amends in places we had forgotten. He returned a few tools he had borrowed and not yet taken back to a neighbor. I called a friend I had canceled on twice and set a new date for tea. We both did small, ordinary things that told the truth. We were trying. Through all of this, we kept meeting with Ruth. She did not count successes. She reminded us to notice what was hard and what was kind. She asked us once what we would keep if we had to let go. I said, "The way we sit at the table and tell the truth." Evan said, "The way we keep our voices soft." We talked about the future, but not with blueprints. "Do you think we will be okay?" he asked one night, standing at the sink. I dried my hands and leaned on the counter. I think we will be honest, I said. I think we will be kind. I do not know if that will be together in the way we were before. He nodded and looked down. I hear you, he said. Accepting that trust may not return to what it was felt like stepping onto a new floor. It was sturdy, but it had a different sound. When we walked across it, the house sounded changed. It was not a sign of failure. It was the truth of a home that had weathered something and had to learn its new music. We said this out loud to each other one night at the table, with the candle burning low. I do not think we will go back, I said. I think we can go forward, but it will not be the same shape. Evan took a breath. I know, he said. I want to go forward with you, even if we need to change the way we do it. We began to imagine different rooms. Maybe we would keep the bedroom. Maybe we would not. Maybe we would have separate desks for a while, separate quiets. We did not decide. We let the questions sit like folded blankets on the couch. We would pick them up when we were ready. I found my voice in pieces and then in a steady line. I learned the weight of the words I want and I do not want. I practiced them on small things first, like dinner plans. I want soup tonight. I do not want to watch that show. They grew easier. I used them on harder things too. I want to read this letter alone. I do not want you to hold this for me. Evan found his own words. He said, I was wrong, in a way that was not a performance. He said, I am scared, without asking me to make it better. He said, I am proud of you, when I led a check-in at group or when I mailed a letter not for the act itself, but for the way I stood where I stood while I did it. We had a day when the sky was full of small white clouds that looked like someone had pulled them apart with their fingers. We drove to the lake and walked to the edge of the water. Evan took a little bird out of his pocket, one he had carved early on. He held it out to me. I wrote on the belly, he said. I turned it over. His small letters said, no more locked rooms. I felt a wave of sadness and of love at the same time. I took the bird and put it in my pocket, where it rested like a smooth memory. The shed became just a shed again. It held tools and the smell of cedar and the hum of the radio on Sunday mornings. Sometimes I sat on the threshold with a cup of tea and watched his hands move, and he would lift a piece of wood for me to see the grain. The door stayed open when he worked. When it rained, he pulled it to with a simple latch. We learned the sound of that small click and did not flinch. I mailed the crocheted baby blankets to a friend of a friend who had a newborn. Lydia wrote a note to tuck in with them, made with hope, carried with love. It felt right to let them be used. It felt like what they were meant for. The guest room corner looked lighter after. We planted tomatoes again in late spring. The fence Evan had built around them held. They did better this time. I sent my father a photo of the first small red fruit, and he sent back a picture of his own with a thumb up and the words, "We're learning." The simple truth of that sentence made my eyes warm. We took down the list from the fridge that had all the plans in a neat line. We put up a new one with fewer things and more space between them. It said, make soup, walk, read together Sunday. It said, call Maya. It said, counseling at 5. The spaces felt like breaths. We needed them. On the anniversary of the storm, we sat on the porch in the evening with 2 blankets over our legs. The yard was quiet. The shed stood under the soft cloud light. We did not talk about that night right away. We watched the sky. We listened to a night bird call from the maple. After a while, Evan said, I wish I had put the letters on the table and said, these are yours. I nodded. I wish I had asked, what are you keeping out there? And not stopped asking. We looked at each other and let those wishes be what they were, truths from a road we did not walk. We both knew, sitting there with the blankets and the quiet, that even with all the work, trust had settled in a new place. It was not gone. It was not the same. It had a different depth and a different temperature. We could stand in it. We also knew we might not stay in it together forever. Numbing that did not break us. It made the room honest. When we went inside, I took the pendant off and set it on the dish by the door. Evan hung his jacket on the hook under the empty place where the key used to be. We turned off the light and let the house be itself in the dark. We were tired in a good way. In the morning, we woke early and made coffee. We sat at the table with our cups and watched the steam drift. We did not make big decisions. We made small ones. I will call Ruth and set the next date, he said. I will write to Dad, I said. I will go to the group on Thursday. He said, I will be here when you come home. That was how we lived in the weeks and months that followed. We did not pretend the past had a door we could close. We kept it in the room with us, but we did not feed it more than it needed. We built our days with small, honest pieces. We watched each other try. We tried ourselves. Sometimes I looked at Evan and felt a warm rush of the old tenderness that came when we used to walk through the farmer's market and point at peaches. Sometimes I looked at him and felt the ache of what had been taken from me without my consent. I learned to let both be present. They did not cancel each other out. They stood on either side of a quiet road, and I walked between. One night, we lit a candle and read the last letter in the box from my father. It was not the last he would ever write, just the last we had. He wrote, "I know I cannot claim what I broke. I can only offer what I am building now." He drew a small heron at the bottom, goofy and careful. We laughed and cried at the same time. Evan reached for the tissue box and handed it to me without a word. We did not win anything. We did not lose anything that was not already gone. We learned to tell the truth and to stand in it without raising our voices. We learned that love and trust are not the same, though they like to hold hands. We learned that love can stay even when trust is learning a new language. When I think of that time now, I see our table with the candlelight making a small halo on the wood. I see the open shed door with the radio humming low. I see my sister's oranges on the counter and the library newsletter folded neatly by the basket. I see my father at the park bench, his coffee cooling, his eyes steady. What I feel most is the shape of my own voice as it returned to me, step by step. It did not come back loud. It came back sure. It asked for what it needed. It said no when it had to. It said yes when it wanted to. It helped me stand, even on a floor that sounded different under my feet. And in that quiet, slow turning, Evan and I accepted something we had not wanted to name. Trust, once broken like this, may not return to what it was. It can take a new shape. It can be tender and true in a different way. We could honor that. We could keep walking with care into whatever came next. We did not decide in one night. It came over weeks like a soft tide. In counseling, Ruth asked, "What does staying look like? What does leaving look like?" We sat with those questions the way you sit with a cup of tea you do not want to drink too fast. One evening at our table, with the window open and the chime making a tiny sound, I said, "I think we need to live apart for a while." Evan nodded. "I think so too." We spoke gently about the practical things. No rush, no threats. He found a small place not far away with a shared garage where he could keep his tools safe. I said I would stay in the house for now. We agreed to share the cost of what still tied us together until we found our feet. On the day he packed, the sky was clear. Maya came and folded boxes. Lydia brought sandwiches and paper plates. We did not make speeches. We did not make a show. We moved slowly, paused often, and drank water on the porch. Evan kept his tools and the radio. He took his clothes and the jar of nails he once gave me because it had always made him smile. He left the little bird that said "No more locked rooms" on the table beside the basket for mail. He touched it once with his finger and then stepped back. "It should stay here," he said. We stood in the shed together one last time. The door was open. The air smelled like cedar and warm dust. The workbench was bare, wiped clean. I ran my hand along the smooth wood. "Thank you for the care you tried to give," I said. He bowed his head. "I am sorry for the harm I did," he answered. We let both be true. Before he left, we made tea. We sat at the table where we had read letters and learned to tell the truth. He said, "You taught me to ask, 'Do you want company?' I said, "You taught me that love is a verb, but it needs consent to be love." We looked at each other and knew this was our soft goodbye. At the door, we did not hold on too long. We did not promise what we could not promise. He said, "Call if you need anything, even if it is only someone to listen, breathe." I smiled because he had remembered my sister's words from long ago. "Take care," I said. "You too," he answered. He stepped off the porch and walked down the path. The house felt different, but not empty. It felt like a chest after a deep breath out. I opened the windows. I watered the herbs. I put the pendant from my grandmother on. I stood in the doorway of the shed and felt no rush to go in. The lock was gone. The latch was simple. The room was just a room. In the weeks that followed, we were kind at a distance. He sent a message when the tomatoes turned red. I wrote back, "We're learning." Lydia and I had tea on Tuesdays. Maya and I walked by the lake. My father and I kept our short meetings and our slow letters. The support group became a place where my calm voice found its seat. I learned something I want to share because it took time to feel it fully. Love and protection are not the same as control. Protection stands beside you. It asks, "Do you want a coat?" Control steps in front and says, "Do not go outside." Love asks. Control decides. A boundary is a line we draw together so we can both feel safe. A wall is what we build when we are afraid, and it keeps both people out. Listening is not fixing. Listening is a chair you pull out and offer. It sounds like, "Tell me more," and "Do you want quiet or words?" Honesty is not a hammer. It is a light. You do not have to shine it in someone's eyes. You can set it on the table and let it be there while you both breathe. And coming home to yourself is not a big move. It is the small things. It is opening your own mail and reading your own name. It is standing in your kitchen and saying, "I want soup," and trusting that the world will not fall apart because you chose. It is holding your own key and knowing you can open and close your own doors in your own time. Some nights I still sit on the porch with a blanket and a cup of tea. I watch the light change. I think of the girl I was, standing on one leg like a heron in old photos. I think of the woman I am, steady and soft. I send a quiet thank you to the parts of our love that were true. I send a quiet goodbye to the parts that were not. If you are listening to me now and there is a closed door in your life, I hope you feel my hand near yours. I hope you remember that you are allowed to ask, "Is this protection or control?" You are allowed to say, "I want to choose." You are allowed to listen to the small ache behind your ribs and let it speak. We parted gently. We kept our voices soft. We honored what we could not go back to, and we chose to go forward anyway. I do not know the end of my story yet. I only know this: the heart learns. The heart can learn to live with open windows and honest light. And when you come home to yourself, when you hold your own keys and your own name, the house inside you can be quiet and kind, no matter the weather.